Welcome to Old Guy, Old Camera. This is going to be my first ever YouTube video. It's not going to be very good, but it was one of those, it's time to go or get off the pot moments in life. Recently retired. I know a lot about cameras. I'm not an expert. I'm not a professor of camera and photography, but I messed with it quite a bit when I was in high school. I was the yearbook guy, one of them. Darkroom, developed my own film, used the Pentax K1000. Who didn't? If you went to school and learned photography. Attempted to be a professional photographer part-time, did some weddings, did some Little League ball pictures, had some success, did some portraits. But truthfully, and I keep looking at myself instead of the camera, truthfully, I just don't have the business savvy and the personality to deal with a lot of people. So if you're going to be a professional photographer, you deal with a lot of people, So I became more of a camera enthusiast, a collector. When cameras got cheap about 10 years ago, I started buying cameras that I just thought were cool, different varieties of camera. Old cameras, not so old cameras, cameras I have used, cameras I'll probably never use. But I thought, what a waste. I've got all this stuff. I don't shoot them much anymore. I don't shoot a lot of pictures anymore. I have a digital SLR, which I really appreciated for a long time, and now I don't even do that. So I thought it's time to break out some film cameras, put some of my knowledge to use, share it just for giggles. If you get anything out of this at all, great. I hope to do more than just one. This will be the first one, and this will be terrible. I promise you, it will be a terrible YouTube video, but there will be some content, there will be some information that will be useful, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. I even had to go buy a selfie stick so that I could maybe do this a little better than just holding the camera in front of my face. So this will be fun. Come along, won't you? So this camera we'll be using today is probably a camera I picked up in a thrift store, or very likely a Goodwill, for next to nothing. I mean, I might have paid $5, I might have paid $10. It's in really nice condition for its age. The Agfa Silet, however you would pronounce that, started production in 1953 and was in production for a number of years. This particular camera came with, you could get it with any one of 3 different kinds of shutter, a brand of shutter, 3 different kinds of lens. This one is probably the bare bones basic low-end model. The shutter speed only goes to a 200th of a second. The maximum lens aperture is 3.5. This is basic. There's no motor. There's no battery. There's no light meter. There is nothing. There's very little to go wrong other than a few gears, and then the leaf shutter itself, which those blades can get sticky over time. And that's something you'll want to test, and I talk about that later in the video, how to see whether or not that's working. But the great thing about this is, like I said, there's very little to go wrong. Pick it up and test fire it a time or two, and as long as the shutter's working, grab it, take it home. It's great for a shelf. It's pretty. It's the black and the silver, or the brushed aluminum. Is a nice little shelf piece. There's no dents. There's a few little abrasions. This thing is really cool, but it's bare bones. It is the Volkswagen of cameras. But we're going to put a roll of film in it, and we're going to take some pictures, and we're going to see how easy it is to use a camera that's even older than this old guy. So, using an old camera, why not use some old film? The expiration date on this is 2010. Now, the odds are it's still good, but the odds are it also may require some adjustment on exposure. So here's our camera. Every camera has its own unique way of opening. This one I'm drawing a blank. Here it is. Little switch on the bottom right here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so you push that switch down, a little switch right there with your thumbnail. It was a little tight, revealing the back of the camera. The the nub of the spool goes down, and the top of the spool, which is sort of female, fits up into, oh, there we go. Most cameras you have to pull up, what they call this, the rewind wheel of some sort or other, to let the cartridge, film cartridge fit in. This is tough while you're trying to watch the camera. All right, put that back down. So now we're in. We have a tab. Pull the tab over about yay far. You want the sprockets, both sprockets, the top and the bottom, to catch the film. There's usually a slot in the take-up wheel. There it is, a slot. Put your tab in there. Put your tab in there good. Make sure your sprockets are engaged on the top and the bottom. This is the tricky part because things can go wrong. That tab can pop out. But we're going to close the door. And on this particular camera, we have to push the little lever back up so that it stays closed. This has a thumb bar for winding the film. We're going to wind one. Oh, we didn't zero our film counter. This one has a film counter that you have to zero. We'll do that afterwards. So we've wound it once, we've wound it twice, click. We've wound it 3 times. Now we're ready to go. Now we're going to put the counter on 0 on this particular camera because it does not default to 0 when you open the film back like some cameras do. This is a very basic camera. Very simple operation, very manual operation. Okay, the red number is 0, so it's roughly on 0. So we're going to make that our starting point. So when we shoot the picture and advance the film, we should be on 1, or the first tick mark past 0. So let's go out and take some pictures. As I probably discussed earlier, I'm going to use an accessory light meter because this camera does not have one. It has manual shutter speed, manual aperture settings, and we're going to use a handheld light meter to tell us what those should be under these sort of semi-overcast conditions. All right, here's my handheld meter. I've set the ASA to 50 to slightly overexpose the old film so that I get a decent print out of it. I'm going to get up close to my subject here and hit the button, take a reading, maybe come back and get another one. All right. Now, so if the needle was way off, we would turn it until it lined up, and then choose one of the combinations of shutter speed and aperture from the meter. We're going to go with, let's see, we're going to go with, what are we going to go with? Because everything's sort of in the middle. We'll do f11 at 250. I think we have that combination on our camera here. So let's see. All right, we have 200. So we have 200, and we have 16. I'm going to set it to 16. I think that's a good compromise. 16 at 200. We've already wound the shot. And I'm going to compose a picture, and I'm going to snap a root here. Oh, I'm too close. I got to get back. It's about probably a 45 to 50 millimeter lens. And let's give it a snap. Click. So we've taken our first shot. So when you see these old cameras, especially this variety with this kind of lens, this has a leaf shutter lens. The shutter's actually in the lens. You'll see the leaves, the folding leaves open and close in a circular pattern, not like a curtain like in a lot of SLRs. But so you'll see a name on the perimeter of the lens that usually refers to the lens. So it's an Agfa brand camera, and it's an Agfa Color Agnar lens, 3.5 f-stop maximum opening. The name, Silhouette is the brand or the model of the camera. The Vario is what they're referring to as this particular shutter, the model of shutter on this camera. On this ring here, you've got your shutter speeds, and we've only got a choice of 4, really. 1/25th of a second, 1/50th, 1/200th of a second, or bulb. The focus on this particular camera is manual. You basically have to estimate your distance from your subject in feet. So that's 10 feet right there, 15, 30, and infinity. And you have to sort of guesstimate yourself. And as far as adjusting the aperture, the maximum opening on the lens, we are turning this dial here to choose what the meter tells us. What did I say the last one was? F11 at 200, I believe. Let me take a few more pictures. My handheld meter told me F11 at 200. This is an overcast day with a little drizzle, so the lighting conditions vary slightly. But I'm just going to take a picture of this split rail fence because the lighting's not real complicated. It's not real shadowy. It's not real bright. It's not real dark. It's really perfect conditions for a decently exposed photo. We might take a few more. It's a beautiful spot. This is the Manassas battlefield in Northern Virginia, home of the Bull Run battle. So about halfway through my roll of film, my spider senses started tingling, and I really didn't trust the light meter readings I was getting from my handheld light meter, which is older than my oldest child. So I quickly downloaded a light meter app. There's lots of them online. I don't recommend any one in particular. Each one of them probably comes with spyware. But when I tried it out, it was definitely giving me some different meter readings. Switched up to 5.6 at 200th of a second from what I was shooting earlier. I guess we'll find out when the film gets developed how far off everything was. So I'm going to rewind the film, and what you do with these old cameras is there's usually a knob or a wheel. The R in the arrow is a dead giveaway, but you can't just start turning that. You have to press the button underneath. Most cameras have a button underneath. You'll press that button. That allows the sprockets to go backwards, and then I'll crank that in the direction of the arrow until I hear the tab pop off inside the camera, and it'll also start to turn more easily, letting me know that the film, the end of the film has come off of the take-up spool. Give it another quick turn or two, and the film will be inside the cartridge, all ready to go to the processor. Did I say this was my first YouTube video? Does it show? So after I pressed the button on the bottom to release the gears and turned in the direction of the arrow that seemed like forever, I eventually heard the film pop off, rustle around in the spool. I knew I was there, gave it a few more turns. So let's see. Open the back of the camera. And we should be good. If all went well, I've got some, well, okay, right, gotta pop this open. Pop that up to release the film. Ah, there we go. It's all tucked back in. Now I know, or at least I have a feeling, that my exposure was off a bit on some of my early photos, but we'll see. Really, when you get good at exposure calculation, back in the day, if you knew what film speed you had and you knew what the weather was. Was it bright sun? Was it overcast sun? Was it overcast? Was it indoors? They had a simple scale. Once you memorized it, you could set your camera up. The sunny 16 rule, if you Google that, you'll see that, on a sunny day with a certain film speed, you set your aperture on 16 and your shutter speed on, I can't remember, 125, I believe, and that pretty much is a guaranteed proper exposure for a camera like this. And you don't need a meter. And I'm fairly certain that my first couple of photos, while I was babbling on the camera, I did not set my focus, which, will ruin your picture every time. You have to guesstimate your distance to the subject and focus the lens. Now, on a rangefinder camera, which this is not, there'll be the main viewfinder window, and there'll be a smaller glass window, usually a small square. And there's a mechanism inside where when you turn the focus ring, there's some gears and some mechanisms inside the viewfinder that will show you when you have reached focus. And there's I'm sure you can find an interesting explanation about how that works inside the camera, but there's some mirrors at some angles, and there's a shadow image. When you look in the viewfinder, in the very center of the picture that you're seeing through the viewfinder, there's a small shadow image, and as you adjust the focus and the two windows work together and the mirror inside, and you'll see almost a ghost image of what you're looking at in the center. And as you focus closer to proper focus, though, the ghost image will come together with the actual image, and that's how you focus a rangefinder. And maybe I'll get a chance to show you that at some point with another camera. But this is such a basic camera. Shutter speed, aperture, focus, everything else is mechanical. Wind the film, press the button, take the shot. The key is really the meter reading that whatever you use to determine your exposure is what determines whether your picture is going to look bright and crisp and clear and colorful, or muddy and dark, or faded and pale. That's the key. And if you pick up one of these cameras, as I talked about earlier, and you wind the shutter and you press the button and you hear the click, and you can see, here, let's see if I can demonstrate this one more time. This is the best way. Oh, this little booger. Okay, it's open. You open the back. You hold the camera up to a light source. You wind the shutter. You click the shutter button. Did you see the light? It was there and it was gone. That's my shutter, and that's working properly. And that was at 200th of a second. So let's crank it down to the slower speed of 1/25th of a second. We'll see the same flash of light, but it will be slower. See that? So now my slow speed works. You always want to check your fast speeds and your slow speeds, because on cameras with multiple speeds, there's two different springs, there's two different mechanisms. There's one for the slow speeds and there's one for the fast speeds. Usually if you get over a 15th of a second, maybe a 30th, you're moving on to the second mechanism. So you may have a camera where the fast speeds work and the slow speeds don't, or the slow speeds are sticky and way too slow. The other issue, here we go, do this again. This thing's going to loosen up at some point. The other is, okay, so you switch to bulb. Bulb means basically, if you hold the button down, the shutter stays open. Now watch this. I probably can't do this with one hand. All right, so there's my shutter open. You'll notice the opening is pretty wide. Okay, hang on. I'm going to adjust my aperture to a smaller number, to f16. And you will see how small the hole is now. That's the f16 aperture. So now I know my aperture works. It's not stuck. Sometimes they can get stuck open, stuck closed. There it goes closed when I let off the button. So that's the other way to determine whether your camera is functioning properly or not. So here's the photos from our outing with the Agfa Select camera. That's the first image, and it's a little gray and dull, and the mid-negative was underexposed, and I'll show you that in a minute. But some of my other shots are clear. It's old film, so the colors aren't real vivid, but with the, you know, basically estimating the focus and setting that manually, I got some fairly sharp images. And I got some good highlight and shadow detail in my fence. You know, they're not amazing, but they came out. I'll show you the negatives here in just a second. So when a negative is underexposed, it's very thin, and you can, you know, barely see the image. And an image that's, you know, more properly exposed is darker. The dark areas will represent the lighter areas on the print, and vice versa. That's why it's called a negative. Your shadows are white, your highlights are dark. And you know, the first picture was horribly underexposed. Strangely, the second couple were close, then some more underexposure, and then after I got the handheld light meter, well, the downloaded cell phone light meter, things started to get a little better toward the end there. Everything's, you know, we've got some good density in the negatives. And even with a crappy negative like that, the Photo Lab can make a decent looking image. So you may get your pictures back and you might think they look okay, but you look at the negatives and you're like, geez, you know, my exposure was way off. You know, this compared to, you know, this. So just something to be aware of when you look at your negatives. It's definitely worth doing a forensic exam of your negatives to see how well your meter's working. So that'll about round out the Agfa Select. Please leave any comments below, any questions. Again, this was my first YouTube video. Not the first post, but the first one I made. It just took a lot to edit. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I get better at it. Thank you.